Thank you very much. My name is Gary Hallam. I work for Delphix. I'm the pre-sales director across EMEA. And I'm here to talk to you about how to present GDPR as an excuse to increase efficiency and accelerate innovation. Okay, so I'm going to tell you what Delphix does and then move on to explain how we deliver value within organisations. So, of course, with GDPR, I used to work for Oracle in their information security division, so I'm used to peddling fear. Okay, so with GDPR, you know, it's a worldwide scope. There's a 72-hour burden. There's a burden for access to data. There's a burden for you to delete data. There's a burden for you to protect that. And if you don't do that, it's going to cost you a lot of money. And it's going to happen very, very soon. And if you haven't started working on it, then you're already too late. So there's a bit of fear I've peddled. And then also, your data's vulnerable. And most of your vulnerable data isn't in your production systems, because you protect them quite well. But often a lot of the sensitive data is also in your non-production environment. So for instance, Daimler have an SAP system which has got a lot of data in it, but they've got 60 non-production copies of that data around the world. So that's 60 times more data in non-production environments, and you've got to protect all that data. And often you don't know where that data is. And as we heard earlier today, really, you've got to catalogue, you know, where is all of your data? And you don't know. You know, I for one, am a manager, so I have sensitive data from my employees, and I got that on spreadsheets, and sometimes I send emails. So actually knowing where all of that data is really, really difficult. But we've got to do something about it. So what can we do? If you look at sort of non-production environments, and really that's what Delphix helps with, it's non-production environments, then there's a good solution to that, and that is not to send out any production data. No. Okay? So there's you. Can I have a copy of the production data? No. Problem solved, but you're not going to get much innovation and efficiency in that way. Yeah. So you could devolve the responsibility down to your developers, and they're going to make it up as they go along, and you kind of know exactly what's going to happen. When that product that they're developing gets into production, it's probably not going to work. And if it doesn't work, that might be a good thing, but it could be even worse. It could damage things in production. Yeah, so you could break things, and then your customers can't access the things that they need to access to buy products from you. And one of the other solutions we could do is build this mass test data factory. And this is, you know, a lot of the big SIs sort of advocate this to say, okay, we've got, you know, you've got production data. We want to create an environment where we can provision that data, perhaps mask the data, and then replicate the data, and maybe subset the data and do some work on that data. And then your developers and testers can have a pull from there to create a test data factory, and then push things. You know, a developer can choose the kind of data they want. And that's great, and obviously masking has to come into that somewhere, but actually, potentially that masking is going to slow things down. So the whole thing's, you know, doom and gloom, really. There's a lot of things that we need to do. We're not doing it quickly enough. We can either shut off production, and there's a lot of organisations that say that. So I was talking to Lloyd's banking group, and they have a whole industry, cottage industry around creating test data, really, because they've got to put it from many different systems. But management have gone, well, we shouldn't really be using production data. So they just want to shut it off completely. That's not the risk, you know, less risk that way. But then they've got so many systems that are so old. So for instance, my bank accounts, when I started university, that's on an old system, and if you don't test with production data, then you're not really testing the extremities, and therefore you can break things. So that's the problem there. We've got the test data factory, and that works. And really what Delphix does, it doesn't create this for you, but it accelerates this and makes it much more efficient. So looking at test data again, so ideally you want high quality data, and you want it very, very quickly. So one of the best things you can do is have a full production clone and work on that, but obviously there's risks associated with that. You can start to subset that data, because obviously if you're only putting out a subset of data, then you've protected all of the data that you haven't sent out. And also it's smaller and easy to work on. And if you create synthetic data, then in theory that's quite safe, because it's not real and you haven't started from production, so that's good. And then in testing land, you've also got this idea of shared data environments, which is also very good, but the problem with that is that other people use your data. So, you know, I was talking with Argos the other day, and one of the issues that they have this shared data, they do some work and create some environments to work with, but then all of a sudden someone else has used those data sets, you know, oh, where's all my inventory gone, and that sort of thing. So what we really need, and what we talk about, is virtual data. Yeah, so with Delphix, we actually virtualize your production database, which means you can access it very, very quickly, and we can also start to manipulate it very, very quickly as well. But the virtual data doesn't actually sit there, it actually sits under the whole thing. So if you put your full production clones of your data subsets and synthetic data and your shared data on virtual data, then all of a sudden you've got a massive agility. And I'm going to show you how that works, okay? But before I do that, let's talk about this data. So data is heavy, right? So actually moving data around is hard work. And I presented this the other day, and I said, well, actually, data is like moving elephants. You know, moving elephants is difficult because I don't know whether you know, it was Prince Harry was out in Africa last summer, and he's going back out there again this year, I think. And what he was doing out there, he was actually moving elephants, would you believe? And it was quite hard. He had 500 elephants to move about 200 miles, and he only managed to move half of them. So he only did half the job, and he's got to go back there this year. So, you know, moving data is a bit like moving elephants. It's hard, it's tough, and it takes a lot of effort. And as you can see, that's not me there, that's Prince Harry. He's got something from that. I'm much more luck with the ladies than So moving data is tough, needs a lot of people, and you also need a lot of hardware. And I don't know about you, that elephant looks like it's going to take a lot of refreshing once it's moved to where it needs to. And that's the other thing about production data, it's hard to refresh it. You know, if you've got the data, refreshing it takes a lot of effort as well. But obviously we've got all of this data and we've got to mask it, and sometimes when you mask data, it doesn't always produce the results that you expect. So if you mask data, you break things, yeah? And sometimes you mask data, you can still tell what it is. And obviously we've masked this, but we can still see that that's an elephant, and that may or may not be a problem for you. Okay, so let's look at what we do then. So in a typical environment, there's our elephant again. What we have, we've got the production data, we've got to create our non-production environment. And if we've got 10 terabytes over here, then we've got to move that around, and that takes a lot of effort. Yeah, so 10, now all of a sudden I've got 30 terabytes to deal with. That's tough. We actually recently, we were working with a company, a banking company that says they've got the biggest Microsoft SQL Server database in the world. That's what they claim. They said no one can touch it. It's 80 terabytes. They've just implemented Delphix, and we can provision 80 terabytes of data in 15 minutes, under 15 minutes, which is fantastic. So we can move data very, very quickly. And how we do that is Delphix is a virtual machine appliance, okay, that sits between the application and the storage layer. And instead of moving the data around, what we actually do, we move the data once. So we ingest the data from your production environment, we bring it into the Delphix storage environment, and we work on any storage and we compress it. And we compress it down to about 30%, which is actually quite good. So we compress it down to 30%, so we reduce the amount of data, and then we do that on an incremental basis. So rather than pulling all of that data, all that 10 terabytes of data over and over again, we bring it in once and then we just take what you've changed. So we just bring in incremental changes, and we do that using the backup technology that you use today with SQL Server or Oracle or DB2. So now what we've got in Delphix is a time machine. So rather than having the concept of, right, I need to go and find my backup, let me find which backup I want, let's get that data, I talk to my storage admin and I get all of that information, I've now got a time machine. And now I can provision virtual copies of the data. So actually I can push that data onto these machines. So I've got 30% size of the original data. And now when I provision data to one of these applications, what Delphix does, it doesn't actually move the data. It gives you access to the data. So in the same way when you're working on your laptop and you delete a file, actually you haven't deleted anything. All you've done is delete the operating system's access to that file, and that file's still sitting there until the operating system decides to overwrite it. With Delphix, we're managing those pointers, and we can copy those pointers. So when we provision 10 terabytes of data over here, all we're actually provisioning is a set of indexes to that data on the Delphix storage, and we manage that. So, and as you can imagine, that 10 terabytes of data we can deliver in about 5 minutes. Okay, And we can do it many, many times, because all we're doing is delivering pointers. So actually, 10 terabytes of data, the actual size of data we deliver is in the order of megabytes. So all of a sudden, you now have access to a lot of data very, very quickly with very little infrastructure requirements. And that's great. So that means that, you know, I can get about 90 to 1, so I can get, 10 to 1, so I can get, you know, 10 copies of my database for the size of one copy of the database. And so that means much less infrastructure, and it gives me a lot of speed and agility. All of a sudden I can refresh data, I can deliver data very, very quickly. But not only that, on top of that, I now have a self-service capability. So one of the biggest problems of getting data in a non-production environment is actually getting the people to do that. So if I need to access some expert resource, if I need a DBA to do that, and that DBA is busy, I'm going to have to wait for that. Or most of the time, you know, people have outsourced their data centers, and actually it's an SI that's delivering that data, and they not only are they going to be busy, they're going to charge for that, and they're going to have a service level. So we recently implemented a solution in TUI, and I was involved in the proof of concept that we had for that. And one of the things they said was, it takes us 24 hours to mask the data. So they can deliver the data, and it took them about 5 days to set the data up, and then they've got to mask the data, so that's an additional day. I said, right, okay, I'm ready for it now. Let's get this masking thing that's going to take 24 hours. It's going to be big, right? So what do you mask? He said, oh, we mask these 6 columns. Well, how much data have you got? Well, you know, there's millions of rows. Okay. So I said, well, you know, it takes them 24 hours. And I pressed the button. I said, right, we've got those 6 columns. Let's mask the data. It took 3.5 minutes. So I said, why does it take you 24 hours? He said, oh, no, that's the SLA. So they've got 24 hours to mask the data, but a job that takes 3.5 minutes. So you can imagine if you've got self-service, all of a sudden you've removed, you know, 23.5 hours from that problem. So that really, the self-service capability is really important. So this is the product that we've got. It's sort of a schematic diagram. We work on any data source. We automate Oracle, SQL Server, Sybase, and DB2. We can do any other database as well, but not quite so automated. There's a little bit of work to do on that. We work on flat files, and we do e-business suite and SAP. Okay, so we sit, it's very, very easy to implement. You just need to import a virtual appliance onto VMware, Amazon. We've got an Amazon image. We work on KVM. I think it's not Facebook. It's another big company, Apple. So Apple uses on KVM. And recently, we're now working on a beta for Microsoft Azure. I was talking to Microsoft the other day, and yeah, it was great. We've got this beta, and I could instantly set up an environment, a Delphix environment, sitting in Microsoft Azure, and that's coming out in the next month or so. So that means we can sit in the cloud, or we can sit on premise. We work on any storage, but we like fast storage, and we deliver. So these target machines can just be the target machines you're using today, virtual machines or physical machines. And the self-service, we operate on that, and we operate an admin service on there. But the thing with Delphix is it's really, really easy. Easy to implement and easy to operate. So what do we do? So within the Delphix admin tool, we can mask data, we can transform, so we can do Unix to Linux transformation. We obviously automate things as well. We've got an API, REST-based API. All of Delphix, we've got 2 user interfaces. The whole thing's built on a public API, which means that you can automate anything that we can do. So if you don't like our self-service tool, build your own. And one of our customers, Fidelity, actually did that, and they run on a thing called Oracle Apex. So it's an Apex, so they just used our APIs and they created their own. They're moving to ours because ours is obviously better. But when they started, they built their own solution, and many customers do that. And we can retain data. So we've got this live archive of data. So effectively, you can get rid of a lot of your backups, particularly in non-production environment. You don't need to be backing up the data. Although the database that we create, the virtual database that we create, it looks, smells, feels, and tastes like a real database. So you can run any backup and any application. So the masking is important. The replication is really, really important because we're able to, once you put your data in a Delphix engine and you've got that D-source, as we call it, we've ingested the data, we can actually replicate that data to another Delphix engine. And we can spin up virtual copies almost instantly. So rather, if you've got 10 non-production environments all running off a single D-source, you can actually replicate just the D source and then spin up another 10 virtual copies as well. That's fantastic for migrating into the cloud or migrating across data centers. And if you can imagine, we run in Amazon and Azure and on VMware on any other cloud environment. So that means we can move you around the cloud. So if you don't like the cloud vendor that you're on, or you need some high availability to be, if Amazon goes down, you want to be running in Azure, then we can enable that very, very quickly. So that's the admin tool, and then obviously in the self-service tool, that's where things get really interesting, because now we've got a virtual database which I can press a button to refresh from production, which may or may not be a good thing. I can bookmark the data. So those pointers I told you about, what we can actually do is make an instant copy of those pointers, which means that, so let's say I've got a test environment or I've masked some data and I want to then start to do a test on that data. I can bookmark it, I can run the test, I can break the database, and then I can rewind it and start again. That's almost instant. I haven't got to move that 10 terabytes of data around. In 5 minutes, I can go back to where I started on that bookmark. I can branch the data as well. Branching is even more exciting because not only, so I can bookmark, but what I can actually do is say, well, let me take all of those pointers. I'm going to switch that database off. I'm going to reinstantiate it on this new set of pointers. And then I might refresh again from production. And I might subset the data. So now I've got two versions of the data running on the same target environment, and I can choose between them. So right now it means that as a tester, I can actually press a button and I can decide which version of the data I'm going to use. So I can be working on multiple projects and I say, well, I'm going to test this project on a 10 terabyte database. Now someone says, actually something else is more important, I've got a production problem. I can, as a tester, I can switch to another version of that database instantly. That's really, really, really powerful. Once people realize how that thing works, it just changes the dynamics of how we run, projects, actually. I can roll back the data and I can synchronize means I can actually have multiple databases sitting in this environment. So if I've got a system that runs on Oracle and DB2 and SQL Server, when I do a bookmark, I bookmark across all of those. So I synchronize all of that data, which is a massive issue in big SAP environments and it's a massive issue in testing. And we solve that problem almost instantly. And this is a picture of the self-service user interface. So, this is a different version of the database. I've got bookmarks which I can go backwards to. I've refreshed the data, and this is the point in time now. So actually, and it's sort of Netflix-like, actually. We've added another feature as well, which is a lock. So I can lock any changes to just me. So if you've got a group of people working on this virtual database, I can say, right, I've done something now, so I can lock it. So just a few buttons, really simple to use, really simple to get the test data manager or the development manager to say, this is what we're working on today, this is a copy of the data at this point in time now. And like I say, we can synchronize that, and so Oracle SQL Server and an application data, and I can keep all of that synchronized. Go backwards and forwards in time. So the value there is that we can version the data, as I said, with self-service. So, we're working on release 1.1. Now we need to work on version 1. We can go back to a different branch, and then we can activate and deactivate different branches. And if you can imagine, that's massive, because it means I've got a massive database, 10 terabyte, multiple databases, which are available in zero storage footprint, effectively, and I can choose whichever version I want. So that the storage saving is immense, but the agility that I bring is massive. Because often, people are working on a project, and you keep environments around just in case you need to keep working on it, and people tend to hoard their environments. But with this, we can just switch it off and switch it on. We can test and undo, so if someone breaks something, we can rewind really quickly and start again. And one of the other key things as well is that those bookmarks I talked about, you can actually share them. So if you create two virtual databases and you've got your developers working on one and you're working on another, and they're from the same source, then if your tester comes up with a problem, the first thing the developer is going to say, well, how do you recreate that problem? But as a tester, you can say, actually, here's my bookmark. And so the developer can actually start their database in minutes at the same point in time that the tester was on. So that speeds things up. So where does this go with GDPR? Okay, so one of the other capabilities that we've got is an inbuilt masking solution. It's quite an impressive masking solution as well. So the masking solution was built by an organisation called Axis, And we acquired, actually as a startup, we acquired that company. And they were building on the premise that we mask once and share the data. So with the virtual database, you can imagine, I take production, I create a virtual database, I then mask that virtual database. I've got a new copy of that virtual database. And now I can clone from that clone. So I can create lots of virtual data, can deliver that masked data very, very, very quickly. And that's solving most of the problem of masking solution, that I don't have to wait for the data once I've masked it. And because I'm using little storage, I can mask out of band, so it means I can mask. If you can imagine you've got a 10 terabyte database and you want to mask it, well, I've got to put that 10 terabyte database somewhere. I've then got to mask it, which is another 10 terabytes of data, and then I've got to deliver that data somewhere. So with Delphix, I've got a virtual database that I can mask, which increases the size depending on the number of columns that you're going to mask. But now I can provision that instantly to wherever you like. The masking solution is easy to use, but then I would say that. But it's really simple. If you look at things like ETL solutions like Optim, or stored procedure solutions like Oracle, and I know I used to work for Oracle in the information security, so I know how Oracle masking solution works. It gets difficult very, very quickly. We work on the premise that we create an algorithm, and it's got to be simple to use. We're database agnostic, so SQL Server 2016 comes with its own masking solution, which is great. But if you're running Oracle, SQL Server, and DB2, then you really want to be masking the same fields in the same way. So we're actually deterministic, which means that we could, if we mask a field on any of those databases, we'll mask it in the same way. So, if I mask my name Gary and it becomes John, then it becomes John across all of those systems, which is really important internally. So in the Oracle, if you just use an Oracle database, you've got strict referential integrity, so you've got to mask Gary, it's an index field, all the way across the tables. But actually, there's a looser referential integrity across your organization, which means that value has got to be masked not only in the Oracle database, it's going to be masked the same way in the SQL Server database, and across your file systems. So what if you're passing out log files to people which have snippets of data from your database in? That's got to be masked in the same way as well. So your masking solution's got to be enterprise ready, and it's got to mask any source. And that's what we can do within Delphix. And we talk about self-service, so we can deliver the masking in a self-service way, so we have an API for that. And an enterprise architecture really describes the fact that you've got to have a master-slave capability. So you need to be masking at the data target, but you need to be controlling the masking algorithms in a central location, which is what we can do. And we can also actually change the key. So if you're masking something based on a key, just like you guys all change your password every 2 weeks, then we can actually change the way that we mask things. Now we have that capability. Not many customers are ready to use that, because that's quite a big job. You change the key, then you're masking things in a different way. You've got to mask everything again, and that can be a tough challenge. So the solution does profiling, and then we can secure the data, then we audit the data. Profiling is quite important. So we're working with a customer I can't mention at the moment, but they're trying to mask a Siebel application, and they don't know what fields are sensitive. So what you can do is you have a profiler which can bring a lot of false positives, but actually what we're able to do is modify that profile. So if you've got a homegrown application, we can look at the fields and determine either from the data or from the column name whether we think that data might be sensitive or not, and then we'll present to you an algorithm that we think you ought to be using for that sensitive column. So it's simple. So we've got these 8 algorithms. I think there's 8, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We've got a secure lookup algorithm, segmented mapping, binary lookup, tokenization. So if you look at GDPR, they talk about pseudonymization, which took me a long while to be able to say that. I actually looked at the converse. So orthonym. Do you know the opposite of a pseudonym is an orthonym? So I'm an orthonym. I want my pseudonym to be Batman. So anyway, so tokenization is a special case where you can actually tokenize the data, and then you can reverse that. So within Delphix, you can create a masking environment or a tokenization environment. One is irreversible, and the other one is reversible. So you can reverse a mapping, and you can reverse tokenization. So sometimes when you want to pass the data out, when you get it back, you want to turn it back into the real data. So we're able to do that as well. But what you're able to do within Delphix is actually take these algorithms and create your own custom algorithms from those, which is good. one of the things when you are masking is that it looks easy to start with. Okay, so masking is easy, right? I can change my name to John. That's easy, and I'm deterministic, so everyone becomes John. So I keep the referential integrity. But kind of data is accretive, if you like. So by that I mean, if I've got a certain name and then I've got some ID, some national identity numbers, actually use parts of other columns. So it might use part of my name, part of my date of birth. Take your driving license. So that does some weird stuff with your date of birth. So actually, it starts to become difficult very, very quickly. If you've got fields that are concatenations of values that you want to mask, or you've got fields that are indexes, then it starts to become interesting very quickly. So with Delphix, what we always try and say is, if you are going to start masking, start as simply as possible, and then you always ask yourself, why do I need to do that? Try and keep it simple. Try and draw it back into something simple. So the secure lookup algorithm is a really fast way of masking. And the way that works is, if I take a name field, for instance, so Gary, first name, then secure lookup really creates a table with a lot of first names in it. And then we actually take the field, we hash the value, we do a mod of that hash to get a number. And then with that number, we go and look up we do a secure lookup of this set of names that I've got. And then we pull the other name back. And that's irreversible. And we put some collisions in there as well, so Gary and Michael can both be masked to John, which then means that I can actually go and look up that algorithm and we pull a value back. There's no relation really whatsoever for the original data. So there's no way we can reverse that. That's the fastest algorithm. We say that's the one you should use most of the time, and it should suffice for 50 to 80% of the cases. Obviously, if you've got an index, because that creates collisions, it doesn't always work on index fields. So then you start to need to look at segmented mapping or mapping algorithms in order to get there. But it does work, and it works very, very quickly. So we can mask the data, we can provision the data very, very quickly when you've got this virtualization layer. And we talked about replication. So the way that if you can imagine, the solution is keeping in sync with your production. We're able to automatically mask the sensitive data. We've got a Delphix engine here which is in the production zone. So a lot of banks that users need to keep PCI compliance, so they only ever want secure data outside of the production zone. So if you can imagine, actually for less tight restrictions, we can make sure that we only ever provision a masked virtual database. So we only ever put masked data out there. But the problem is, the actual database itself, we hold the clear data and the masked data. And for PCI compliance, that's not really allowed. So what we end up doing is we've got this thing called selective data distribution. And what that means is that we can actually push only the masked data to a different Delphix engine. So this can be in the production zone, this is in a non-production zone, it could be in the same data center, but to get PCI compliance, we're only pushing masked data out of here. And that actual capability also works if you subset the data. So if you subset the data with a masking job inside of Delphix, then that's quite powerful, because what that is actually doing is ensuring that if you subset the data, you're preventing the data, you're not even delivering any of the data. So actually much more secure if you haven't delivered the data. And if you look at GDPR, does that, if you've masked the data, but if an organisation only needs sets of male data and you're delivering male and female, if you don't subset it, you're breaking the compliance rules a little bit. So we can do that. And also, if you want to shrink the data down and get it into the cloud, we can do that as well. The replication works on a trickle basis, so we synchronize with production, you mask production, and then we'll send only the deltas across to the cloud environment. Obviously, if we've got another Delphix engine in a different cloud, we can replicate from there as well. So it means we can move data around very, very quickly. So that's it really. We've got an API. So as I mentioned, we integrate with many of the DevOps tooling. So I had a guy build a Ruby gem. I don't know whether that means anything to any of you, but that means Chef and Puppet are built on Ruby, so we can integrate very quickly with that. Ansible, many of our customers use Ansible with DevOps, and if you can imagine from a DevOps perspective, it's very easy to create a test environment, very difficult to get 10 terabytes or more data into that environment, but we can do that because we can deliver that data in 5 or 10 minutes. I'm coming to the end now. One of our biggest customers, StubHub, and the CEO of StubHub actually came to our kickoff in San Francisco. I mean, they love our technology, so they were able to, increase the revenue. They acquired Delphix at the time when they were moving from, online to mobile, and they had lots of developers, all falling over themselves because they only had one environment to deliver the data on. So we managed to get from 30 day to daily release cycles, and from 5 to 200 test cycles on their existing system. So really created a massive agility. And Molina, they have petabytes of data on Delphix. And one of the things they needed to do was match the data, and again, they reduced the data risk by 80%. So just to summarize then, innovation and efficiency. GDPR, there's a pot of money there to deliver security, but why not deliver security along with efficiency and innovation? We've got a continuous flow of production data. We've got integrated agile masking. That's the piece you're going to actually sell on GDPR. But we're more than that. We virtualize the data, so we're giving you data self-service. And the idea of synthetic and subsetting data, we can actually version that. So you've only got to do that once and then select from these branches of data on almost zero storage footprint. And we've got the self-service delivery of the right size of data instantly. And the value, most of our customers, the tangible value is the saving in storage. Yeah. So that's real. And we were talking to TUI, and they came to one of our. I had one of my guys presenting a learning session, and we kind of downplay the storage because if you get, storage saving is good, but storage costs are going down. So the value of Delphix there goes down with the storage cost. But actually, it's the agility that you win, and we play that down. And we said, with the storage, storage saving is irrelevant. And the guy in TUI said, well, it's not that irrelevant. We're saving over 100 grand a month on storage. So I wish we'd sold a bit more expensive. So that's it really. So in terms of innovation, as Isaac Newton once said, if I've seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. And I think if you put Delphix at the base of what you're trying to achieve, you'll get massive efficiency. And Delphix, the software itself, is quite elegant. So it sits on. Anyone heard of ZFS storage file system? So ZFS was. I worked for Oracle for 8 years, maybe even longer. And the techie guys were saying this ZFS, and I had no clue what it meant or what the value was. But we've built on top of that, and that's the copy on write technology that allows us to manage all of those indexes and deliver, petabytes of data on almost zero footprint. So, our software stands on VMware, ZFS, and if you put your whatever you do on top of Delphix as well, then you'll go much faster. And that's it. Thank you very much. I think I've run out of time, so are there any questions? I think I've just done half an hour, but...
Yeah, I've got one little question, right? Delphix, from what I can see, it sounds like you do a whole lot more than just, requirements from GDPR with regards to compliance. So I'm just wondering if, just for the sake of GDPR, you could just recap on greatest selling points for Delphix, just regards to GDPR.
So with regard to GDPR, what you need to do for GDPR is to pseudonymize the data, right? So you have to get security built into your solutions. So what the European organisation is trying to do is to have security by design, okay? So what we're able to do is allow you to mask the data. The pseudonymization really is a way of saying, if you store your data in a masked way, then it's not necessary. If you lose that masked data, it's not subject to some of those requirements of reporting. It's not subject to some of the fines, because if you lost masked data, then you haven't lost anything, because it's masked. You can't tell. You can't attribute the data to any person. Okay, so that's key. So we're able to give you a masking solution. Okay, but on top of that, what we say is that the act of masking something is going to cost you money in terms of infrastructure, and it's going to cost you money in terms of slowing down what you're able to deliver to non-production. So because Delphix also provides this data virtualization technology, we actually speed up the process of masking, and we also allow you to mask on zero additional infrastructure. Okay. So actually, the net benefit of introducing Delphix is, one, you've got a masking solution that gives you the compliance, but also because we've got this virtualization solution as well, it means you can mask effectively, so you can provision masking effectively, and you're going to do things much more quickly. So if you can imagine, I've got to mask something, that's going to slow you down, and you've then got to mask all of those databases. But actually, if you say, right, any non-production data has got to come through Delphix, you've now ring-fenced your data inside of Delphix. You can talk to the regulators and say, the only way we provision data is through Delphix, and so you've got that control. Yeah? And your developers are going to want to use the data we provide through Delphix, because we can provision terabytes of data in minutes. So you give them, because most of the time, and I've worked in IT for a long time, and I've been a tester and a developer and all sorts. And if someone puts a rule in place, then I go and see my friend in the operations, and I try and get the data that way. With Delphix, we can give you the data instantly. So one of the problems. Does that answer your question?
Totally. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
So, what's the sort of licensing model, and is it purely just for large enterprise, or have you got like an SME?
Generally, the bigger the enterprise, the better the value, really. So our licensing model is based on engines. So one Delphix engine is at 8 vCPUs of VMware. We have introduced, just introducing consumption licenses. So I've got 30 terabytes of data I want to ingest into Delphix. What's the cost of that? I don't know the details of that. That's coming. I think it's available today. But yeah, one 8 vCPU engine. And it's on a term license as well, so it's a yearly.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.